Hi everyone, it's Sam from the Danger Planet, and today we're going to do a hot take on the Errata. Hi everyone, Sam from the Danger Planet here. As you probably know by now, Wyrd just dropped their Malifaux Errata for July 2023, just in time for Gen Con. It's a lot of changes. Some of them I think everybody saw coming. Some of them were a little bit more surprising to people. So I just want to go down through these changes and talk about what's changed, what's gotten worse, what's gotten better, and maybe what this means for the game as a whole. So these are just my hot takes right off the top of my head. I would strongly suggest you also check out Badfo Haku's hot take on the Errata, which is linked in the description of this video, to get their take, which is a bit longer form. Goes into a bit more detail. So I'm going to start by doing this in chunks, basically. I think that there are several keywords got several models changed all at once. So I think, I'm just going to address those changes together because I think that's the way that makes the most sense to talk about them. So we're going to start with the Witness changes. Witness, I think everybody saw this coming. Witness was extremely broken. And now it's hopefully not. So we'll take a look at what's changed. First, the configuration itself. Big change. The configuration's ability to add suits is once per activation. So not only does this mean you can't get the suit on every single duel, it means you can't get more than one suit at a time, which is a huge change for the crew. Because it used to be you'd basically always build in crows for prioritized triggers and for severe injury on Damien 2 and a bunch of other things. And then you'd sometimes build in rams for Bellaventine Thorpe. You'd sometimes build in masks. You'd have options. You can still have two suits active, but each model can only use one. So you really are going to need to think ahead a little bit more. And one of the other effects of this change is I think that Soulstone Game in combination with some other changes we're going to talk about, are very rarely going to show up. Because the big reason to do House the Soul is to keep that huge stacked configuration that had multiple suits, and now it's a lot less valuable to you to have multiple suits, and you're pretty much always going to have House the Soul 2 between Lohith and your totem, which means the very first model that activates, if they can remove a card of the appropriate suit, they're turning on that suit again. So that's the big change. I think that's going to affect every model in the keyword. But the biggest changes that I think are going to be affected by that, in addition to the models that are being nerfed, are used to be you could make your models fast with your box, and then you could have, for example, you could have 3 prioritized triggers with, Marco Bernani. You could have multiple surge triggers with Mia Murakami. Things like that. You are not going to be able to do that anymore, which means this is a strictly limiting the number of cards you can draw per turn, which was a huge strength of the crew. Lohith, really straightforward. Soulstone Geo does not let you get a plus twist to damage flips anymore. That was really stupid that you were ever able to do that. You can't now, obviously. There was no reason that ability should have ever worked like that. I think he's still obviously amazing. He's a great henchman. He's going to show up in basically 100% of Witness games. They also clarified the way his Claim Gemstones trigger works. Just to be clear, this is not actually a functional change. It is true that it has always been true that you cannot heal the same model multiple times with Claim Gemstones trigger. You could never do that. Anybody who claimed you could do that was arguing in bad faith, and now it's really obvious. So moving on to the real changes. Soulstone Game In. They used to have Prioritize on their Drain ability, which meant the use case for Soulstone Game In is you'd hire 3 of them, and then they'd sit in the backfield, and then they'd all just shoot each other with Drain, because the injured wouldn't be relevant because they were never going to get them into combat. And then every time they do it, you draw cards. So you have 3 game in, pay 12 stones, draw 6 cards. That's not really cool, especially that you also draw a card for repository, so you draw 9 new cards in a turn. 3 of them go in the config, but still. So that's not really acceptable. So it became Drain Magic, which is target discards a card, this model can loot a card. So not only does that not add a card to your hand, it just loots, but it also forces the target to discard, which means they can't shoot each other to do it. I think this was a necessary change, but I also think you're just probably not going to see the game in very much anymore, which is fine, I guess. I think that you will summon them, and that's a good place for them to be. They'll be summonable, and you might hire one now and then. Damien 2, I'm not going to go into the total detail. He got completely reworked. Damien 2's former form was a enormous beat stick with an insane amount of built-in healing, who had this crazy attack with a million triggers, stole the enemy's suits, canceled their soulstone use and card draw, and he'd basically just walk up and kill people, and there's basically nothing they could do about it because they couldn't soulstone it, they couldn't draw cards, they couldn't get triggers against him. It sucked. So that doesn't happen anymore. He's more of a controlling master now, where he can obey friendly models with absolute control, and then let them take their actions through him, which I think is very powerful. I think you're going to do that a lot. AP transfer is very, very strong on this game. He adds cards to your config for free. He cancels enemy triggers, which you do have to discard from the config for, but it's a very strong ability. Ask anybody who's played against Big Brain Bryn. And he still has Chains of the Tyrant, which is just a really strong ability. It is a 4-inch push, deals damage, and can stun targets, and can even deal 3 damage instead of 2. I think you're going to, a lot of the time, once Damien's in position, you're basically just going to go like chains, absolute control. And then he has a nice little bonus action, which is kind of reminiscent of the box's action in that you swap cards with your config and then resolve it effects. So that's pretty cool. I like this new Damien. I think it's going to be interesting to see him on the board. The natural thing to think is that people are going to just play Damien 1, who wasn't nerfed, but Damien 1 actually really does want, built a ton of built-in suits, and the fact that he doesn't just get infinite free built-in suits anymore does limit him. So I think you might see Damien Ravencroft unbound a fair bit. It also, it helps that, if you have triggers on your smaller models that you really would like to declare multiple times in a turn, but you can't do it more than once with the config anymore, you can do it more than once with absolute control, because you can say, I am choosing to take my once per turn, free trigger now, or once per activation free trigger now during this absolute control action. So Damien's cool. I don't think he's dead. I just think he's different. So the next big change that everyone saw coming was the Watchmen. Harrison Frodsham was extremely not okay as a model. He just generating pass tokens is crazy strong. It is crazy strong even when you have to do something to do it, like take an action or spend a card, and he didn't even have to do that. And then there's just all this other stuff he did. So he lost activation control. He still generates a pass token, but so does your opponent. And his Spycraft ability no longer forces the enemy to discard a card or pass token. So you now have there's less of this ability to control people's activations. The other big thing that he did was he handed out focus, but his whole keyword, it handed out a ton of focus, and handing out focus to other models in this game is just really, really, really powerful. It lets you spend AP on lower value models to effectively get an extra AP on higher value models if that higher value model would have just wanted to concentrate anyway. So the fact that Frodsham, his whole keyword could do that, and there was no limit on who they could give the focus to, was crazy strong. So now isochronism is kind of backwards. It used to be that when this model gained a condition, it could share it with somebody else. Now it's when a nearby model gains a condition, this model can get it. So they do still share focus with each other, and with the rest of your crew. They can get it from the rest of your crew. And also isochronism used to be once per turn, and now it's once per activation. So they can stack that up pretty well. If you're near enemies, you can steal good conditions from them, like fast or not fast, but you can steal focused, you can steal shielded. It's just a way of getting conditions on them that even the little gearlings can just end with their bonus action to gain another AP that turn. And then the other little change, also this was definitely unintentional, but basically the way a cog in its place was worded, his little 2-inch push, it triggered at the start of the turn when you discard your pass tokens to kind of recalculate pass tokens. So it would be if people don't spend their pass tokens at the start of the turn, you get 8 inches of push distance or more, and that obviously was not intended. So it's now you have to spend a pass token to skip activating a model. And then they did want to give him some ability to hand out focus to other friendlies, just not nearly as infinite. So his Let's Fix That For You ability now has a trigger. This is going to be once per turn because it's a bonus action. And it's only 2 inches, although you can draw range and line of sight from his gearlings. So you still have some ability to hand out focus. It's just not infinite free focus. And the gearlings also, they lost their pass token generation, same reason he did, and they lost their ability to hand out focus, same reason he did. They got this cute little trigger on Timekeeper's tools, which is you can give enemies the condition that you have, but it's a stat 5 attack. I don't think you do it that often. Watch Chain does now have swift action, so you can do it again, which means you could theoretically get up to 10 inches of push from a single spend of an AP, which makes these guys pretty solid schemers. So I actually do think you will still probably see them, even though they don't generate pass tokens anymore. Next one we're going to talk about is the Sabertooth Cerberus and the Chimera keyword. Now, this was in an interesting position. I don't think Chimera was the strongest keyword. It wasn't the weakest keyword. It was very middle of the pack. But there were 3 major beasts in this keyword, in Chimera, and the only one you ever saw was the Sabertooth Cerberus. People would take 2 Cerberi, and they would not take any bears, and they would not take any snakes. So they kind of rebalanced them. So the Cerberus got a nerf that is almost a side grade. They went down in cost. They did lose Leap, but instead of Leap, their Stalk Prey ability, which was an action nobody ever took, is now a bonus tactical action, which means you'll take it every activation. And it's basically a 6-inch push. Now it has to be towards an enemy model that you can see, so it's not nearly as good as Leap. And it also has certain other downsides, like one of the really strong play patterns with Leap is you'd charge in, do some damage, leap away, and then because you're disguised because of the upgrade that people can hand out, markers can hand out in Chimera, you couldn't be charged. You can't do that anymore. So that is a play pattern you no longer have access to. And they also, really importantly, have a stat 5 instead of 6 on their bite, which is a really big deal because it means you really are going to need to spend a card or maybe even discard a mutation upgrade for adaptive evolution in order to make it more likely they hit. These guys were a lot better when you didn't have to invest cards in them to make them do stuff, and now you kind of do. So this is a big hit. I don't think they're dead, but they're definitely not as appealing as they were. The other 2 animals actually got buffed, though. The Slate Ridge Mauler got it's hard to wound traded for Warning Growl, which is a really, really big deal. Warning Growl is nuts. It's super strong. It's basically AoE hard to wound that cannot be ignored by things that ignore hard to wound. And they got the Chimera Strike trigger on their melee attack, which is a really strong trigger. Because this keyword tends to put a lot of upgrades out, this is often going to be +2 damage, so it makes them have a 4, 6, 7 melee attack, which is really strong. I think bears are really good now. I like them a lot. I would definitely expect to see bears. I think you are always going to take at least 1 just for that Warning Growl, and it wouldn't be super surprising to me to take 2, just because they can do damage now. They still have a 2-inch melee range. They still have, stat 6. And then finally, we got the Snake. The Snake went down in cost as well. The Snake was always kind of weird. First of all, it didn't used to have adaptive evolution, which kind of makes no sense. So it does now, obviously. It had this weird sort of disengage play where it had constriction, so you run a minus twist to disengage, and then wicked, so if you tried to disengage and it hits you, it deals damage. So it was kind of like it would engage you and then you really didn't want to disengage from it. That's almost been flipped on its head. It's lost those abilities, but now it has Feudal Struggle, which is that enemies in base contact with this model cannot move except by disengaging. And that's really strong. It means that if someone's engaged by a Rattler, they can't escape. The trade-off, though, is that the Rattler is fragile still and has even more fragile than it used to be. And so being in base-to-base with an enemy is kind of not really where you want it to be. They're very mobile. They got on Wyrd, the free walk action, and of course they're movement 6 unimpeded. And they got a ranged attack, which is kind of cute. It's still stat 5. I think they're fun, but the problem is they're not very expensive, but even at 6 stones, a lot of the time this guy's just gonna get hit and die because it's got 6 health and then no defensive tech at all of any kind whatsoever. So if it's near a Mauler, then it gets Warning Growl, but it's a lot faster than the Mauler, so it kind of outpaces the Mauler, and it's hard to keep it in its aura. You can give it armor, you can give it Butterfly Jump, you have options, but to me, it feels like this one really still has this sort of cheap minion problem, where it just dies. So I will defer to Marcus players who play it, but I'm not still impressed by the Snake. And then overall, I do think that Marcus probably lost more than he gained with this. The bears are really cool now, though, so I could be totally ready to eat my words on that if the sort of double Slate Ridge Mauler list turns out to be really good. So the last keyword that I think got significant cross-keyword changes is Halfblood. These guys were in kind of a weird place. Halfbloods were part of a starter box that came out in 2nd edition, along with the Asylum models and Guild, and they were very hard to find a mechanical identity for. they don't, obviously they both, you know, have new starter boxes. Their starter box, the Neverborn starter box, is the Grim box, and the Guild starter box, I think we got a little bit of a look at it a little while ago on the Wyrd website with that model with the shielded synergies. So those have been kind of left behind, and I think it really shows in their models. Nobody was really taking Halfbloods. So they did something that was a little bit dangerous, and they took their signature ability, which on the Prowl was very bad. It was, you get to, I think, heal 1 and push 2 inches when you kill a model, which is really not a big benefit given how difficult it is to kill a model with these guys. And they traded it out for Accomplice. And that is really strong. Accomplice is a really good ability. Chain activating is very strong in this game. And they also buffed Angel Eyes and Maurice, both of whom you like never saw, and Tuco, I guess, as well. Although I'm not as excited about him as the other two. Angel Eyes for a long time was like the game's worst sniper. She's probably the best now. She ignores concealment now, which she did not used to. She also has this bonus action to lower the value of one of your models focused to steal it. And she also has this really neat trigger on her sidearm for Blood Offering, which either helps out Nephilim crews or just lets a nearby model draw a card when you kill an enemy model. So she has like a lot of interesting tricks, but I think the biggest thing is just that like the fact that she now ignores concealment makes it much easier for her to just take shots when she doesn't necessarily need to have focus. So you can like give her focused with, or you can give her fast with like Pandora 2, right? And then you give her focused with anyone, like Maurice can give her focus. And then she gets a focus with Point Me to them. And then maybe she concentrates on her, or and then she can concentrate on her activation. And so what she can do is do 24-inch shot, 24-inch shot, concentrate with her fast action, 16-inch sidearm shot. So that's 3 shots at like absolute insane range. If she's close enough that she doesn't need to do that, she could just do like focused shot, focused sidearm shot. Like that's a lot of freaking damage. And even if you're doing nothing but hitting minimum damage on that and not hitting critical strike and not hitting coordinated attack. So like the absolute minimum damage if those 3 attacks hit is, you know, 2 + 2 + 2 is 6. Then you just accomplice into another model and you just dinged someone for 6. So I think she's really good now. She's really dangerous. She's also got cheaper. So you're going to see Angel Eyes a lot. She's still def 4, but like if they can't get to her, kind of who cares? Yeah, this is a scary model. Tuco, a little bit less scary. Tuco's had some stuff shuffled around on his card. He doesn't have From the Shadows anymore. He does have Gunfighter. He had this like crappy claw attack he doesn't need anymore. He lost Good for a Laugh on his shotgun and moved over to his Disillusion action, but he did gain Guns Blazing, so once per activation he can take a shotgun shot with double positives to damage. The problem with that is he needs to be pretty close to do anything. Like he has a 6-inch range willpower attack and then 2 8-inch range like projectile attacks. So yeah, he has stealth, but he's really fragile. He's defense 5, armor 4. Or defense 5, willpower 4 with 7 hit points, and he's an enforcer, so he doesn't spend soul stones. So he's gonna just die if anything touches him. The one thing that I'll say is kind of interesting on him is Throw Dynamite. It's a pretty cool shockwave. It also has a built-in trigger, Fire in the Hole, with an immediately timing, which means you don't actually have to succeed on the ability to get the Fire in the Hole. And Fire in the Hole is just a 3-inch push on friendly models. So you could just, if you really need to, you could just like walk with this guy and do a 3-inch push, and technically you flip a card, but you don't have to flip any cards to make that happen. So I think it is pretty cool that you have that kind of little out of activation mobility with him. And then Maurice, he used to have an action that basically gave him Bodyguard. Now he just has Bodyguard. He also has Foul Mouth Motivation, which is another really strong action on someone with Accomplice, because you heal friendly, you give them focused, and then you accomplice into them. So now this friendly that was kind of beat up and maybe didn't have focus now has focus and is ready to go in there. And then he also has a buffed version of Backup. Backup is an ability that we're going to see later on. Backup is when an enemy model resolves an action that damages a friendly model with an Aura 6, you may discard a card or gain Staggered to take an action targeting the enemy model, ignoring friendly fire. And the big thing that's changed about it is now you can gain Staggered, which means basically the first one each turn is free. Because as long as you don't mind being staggered, you know, someone gets shot, and also this works on if you get shot. So someone shoots you or even hits you in melee, and then you're like, okay, I gain staggered and hit you back for free. So that's pretty cool. Just the first once per turn, you get it for free. If you clear the staggered, he gets it again once. Like, you know, someone hits him, he gains the staggered, he activates, clears staggered. After his activation, somebody hits him, then he gets another free attack. I like Maurice. 7 stones is not very much for what he gives you. I think he is still somewhat fragile, but he's hard to wound. He's def 6, so I think maybe he can stick around if you're, smart. You try to keep him in concealment. Don't just barrel him out there. One more keyword that got changed is Cavalier. This was a keyword that I think was really overperforming, especially out of keyword. So a lot of these models needed to be changed. Specifically, Herald Tull. One of the big things with Herald Tull Artillerist is that all of his abilities had kind of built-in counterplay. Like, the ways that your opponent would counterplay against them, or against him more generally, there were built-in rules to prevent that. So, like, get to position is a classic example. It used to be when he activates 2 friendly Cavalier models anywhere on the table, move 3 inches. So, this is a guy who's got a gun. He wants to be able to shoot his gun. What happens if you engage him? Oh, he just uses get to position and pushes out of combat. Yay. So, get to position is now 2 friendly Cavalier models in Pulse 6. And because it's a Pulse, he can't get himself. So now there's this counterplay, you can engage him. MFGL, his main damage-dealing ranged attack. Now there's counterplay in the sense that it no longer ignores friendly fire, which always was kind of weird. Like, in the lore, this guy doesn't care about friendly fire at all. He just constantly is dealing damage to friendlies and missing his target because he's firing into a melee. So it kind of was weird that he was able to ignore friendly fire. Now there's a little bit of counterplay there. And, you get engaged, he has a harder time shooting you. Forced Retreat used to be called Heavy Bombardment, or Heavy Salvo. It no longer deals damage, which I think is good because that was just one thing too many, and it no longer ignores terrain when it pushes, which is really good because the way this ability used to work is you'd push somebody like behind a house or behind a forest, and then they basically just were gone for a turn because they were way out of position and they were staggered, so they couldn't even get back into position, and they had like no line of sight if you pushed them behind a building. So it really sucked to deal with, and now you can kind of block it with terrain, so it still can push people away, it can stagger them, it can make it very difficult for melee crews, but it's not able to just sort of turn a model off for the turn. It also no longer has a projectile icon, so you can use it while you're engaged, which is pretty good. And then Artillery Strike had this trigger that was remove on all markers within pulse 2 of the assault marker you dropped. Given the 18-inch range and the fact that it ignored line of sight, this basically just meant you could, as long as Tull was near the center of the table, you could basically just ignore like marker schemes because you could just remove their scheme marker from anywhere. No line of sight, no pose duel, it just goes away. And it's not like the trigger is even hard to hit because you have these resupplies on your little walking cannons. They just get the card back. So that's gone, thank God. And the built-in trigger to let your walking cannon take an action is also no longer built in. So you can still get it pretty easily. You could, like I said, you could just take the card and resupply, but it'll cost you a card. So moving on from him, the King's Wall had this absolutely insane AoE defensive buff that was all enemy models, or all friendly models nearby, all enemies are at a minus twist to hit them and to damage them. And that's just gone. It was kind of one thing too many, especially on top of Warning Growl from Watson. Now it's enemy models that end the charge action within Aura 3 of the King's Wall suffer 2 damage. That seems a little minor to me. Like, I think he maybe could have gotten a little more than that. Like, it's weird to me that he doesn't have Take the Hit or some variant of Take the Hit because he's got the big shield. But, it is what it is. I think that he still does a lot. He still has amazingly strong actions. His Shield Slam with the built-in daze is really good. Bulldoze is a master level action. I've Got Your Back is a super strong action. So he does a lot of things. You just no longer have that ability to basically force enemies to target him. And he no longer has his Demise too, that was just like one thing too many on the card. Like, it felt like an ability they added for lore reasons rather than balance reasons. Louisa, moving on to her, she no longer has the ability to ignore friendly, like everything while moving, basically. She ignores models while moving, but she no longer ignores severe and hazardous terrain or vertical distance, and she can now gain staggered. So she was just like the best scheme runner in the faction by a big margin. Now she's still a scheme runner, but there's actually counterplay, there's terrain. Like, if there is some way to generate terrain or to force her to go through terrain, it slows her down. And she got a speed bump. She's movement 7. So she's actually faster if she's not running through terrain. This just gives her, I think, more of a clearly defined role. Also, her defense went down by 1 from 6 to 5, which is significant. It matters. I think you're going to feel the movement change more, but that does matter. And then finally, Watson. Watson was ridiculous. Watson was way too good. Watson was one of the best 9-stone enforcers in the game, except he also cost 7 stones. He costs 9 stones now, which is it's kind of a lot, especially since they took away his hard to kill. Now, the combination of his abilities and hard to kill just really sucked to deal with, because it was very hard to one activation kill him, and if you didn't, he would just heal himself all the way up. He also can't take his own pills. Like, he can't be like one of those crooked doctors who's just like raiding his own supply. He has to actually hand out his take 2 of these and call me in the morning trigger pills to other Cavalier models. I think you might still see this guy at 9. I don't like this guy's design generally. Like, I think he just does too much stuff. I would have much rather seen him stay at 7 but like lose abilities. Like, I think he would have been fine at 7 if he didn't have this ludicrous melee attack and didn't have hard to kill, and maybe that would have been enough. But as long as they're going to give him this stupid attack action, and they're going to have him have warning growl and this 8-inch range on his emergency siret, then I guess you have to have him at 9. But I think this model would play more fun if he was at 7 and just had lost some abilities. So that's Cavalier. Beyond that, we're going to just go down to some sort of individual models I think people should not be super surprised to see changed. Guild mages, the healing throughput on these guys was way too high. So now their Glory of the Guild ability is when a friendly model within Aura 6 discards a card, it can heal. So you no longer heal from enemy discards, and you no longer get to sort of pass through healing from one model discarding to somebody else, which does really limit how much you're able to heal. It also means that enemies can sort of pick a model that they want to kill, wait till it's activated, and then try to damage it, and it's harder for those models to discard cards outside of their own activation. But it's still going to be a lot of healing throughput if you want to set it up, and there are some keywords that discard a lot of cards. The other thing that changed is they got this really cute little bonus action, Arcane Ward, which is any number of friendly models within or Pulse 6 can discard a card to gain shielded. I think that's very strong. It's basically one of your models within Pulse 6 can discard a card, heal 2, gain shielded. That's nice. And they also gained a defense, so I think you're still going to see guild mages. I just think that they're going to be a little bit less frustrating to play against. Peredita. Peredita got pretty significantly changed. She kind of did everything and was like crazy AP efficient, especially along with the guild mages. Like, a lot of the times you do something like Peredita goes Op or L, discard a card, heal something with a guild mage. That discarded card allows a friendly model to shoot. That friendly model shoots, gets, like, maybe it's Nino. Nino shoots. He gets the family values trigger. Family values goes off. Another friendly model gets a concentrate action, and then she gets to draw a card from head of the Ortegas. So that's like, for no AP, you discarded a card, healed 2, drew a card, took a shot, gained a focus. Like, that was a lot. So head of the Ortegas no longer draws cards. It now basically lets nearby minions in her keyword, which is Monster Hunters and Latigo Pistoleros, add 1 suit to their final duel totals. That used to be something that they got from their on-the-job trading ability. That is when you summon a Pistolero and it got a specialty upgrade. Those upgrades have been significantly nerfed. It used to be, when you got an upgrade, the upgrade would, first it would let you, do something. Like, there was always a when it attaches ability. Then it gave the ability a strong AoE buff that basically affected all friendlies in the nearby area. Then it also allowed the Pistolero, as long as they stayed near a friendly model, to get a built-in suit and +1 stat on all their attacks. And it also let them turn into a Monster Hunter. So those abilities have been radically changed. They no longer have abilities that trigger when they get attached. So there's no enter the battlefield ability. The Monster Hunter replace is still there. It's now once per game, which was just a way to avoid a very stupid and unintended gameplay interaction with Death Marshal recruiters. And the buffs that they give are no longer AoE buffs. They're only buffing the model that's affected, and they no longer give the model that they're attached to +1 stat and the suit of their choice. So they get the suit of their choice back from being near Peredita, but they don't get the +1 stat. They don't get the AoE buff. They don't get the enter the battlefield effect. They did give back one of the enter the battlefield effects was removing markers near the summoned model, and they did want her to be able to do that. So that's now a trigger on-the-job training, but it is a trigger you're going to have to soulstone for because the TN has a suit that's not built in. So just be aware of that. However, there is one upside that I think is actually a significant upside that probably makes this model still playable, which is her ability Protector, which pulses out shielded. It doesn't ignore line of sight anymore, but it does allow one family model within range, but with no like restrictions. It's not only minions can attach a specialty upgrade, and that's a really big deal because the specialty upgrades still give pretty cool buffs, and now you can kind of put them on anyone. So, like, for example, Hag Hunter gives a model Counterspell. Like, you put Counterspell on Francisco, that's a really deadly Francisco. Or, like, Ghost Hunter gives the model Ruthless. You put that on Nino, and, like, a Ruthless Nino is really strong in some matchups. So, the ability to kind of hand out different tech, like, you can, if you need, you can give Francisco Quick, which just gives him +1 movement, which is really strong. The ability to hand out tech to your, like, strong keyword henchmen and enforcers is, I think, really cool. I would like to see, how this plays out. I would like to see this sort of on the board before I pass judgment on it, but it does seem pretty cool. So, yeah, we'll see. Oh, and also when you do give it to, when you do give this upgrade to a friendly enforcer, basically not a minion, you do not get the replace into a monster hunter unless it's a minion that costs 5 or less. So just be aware of that. You can't turn Nino into a monster hunter. Not that I think you would, but so that's Peredita. A few other changes. The Iron Matron, I was not super surprised to see her change. Maybe some people were, but I think Tiri was very, very good. The two big things on her were that she got to take 4 attacks per activation, and she had Cruel Disappointment. And Cruel Disappointment is just really strong, and it's really stronger in Explorer Society because that's a faction with a lot of armor and shielded. And Cruel Disappointment, the nature of the ability means that it stacks with armor and shielded very well. So she lost that. She gained Hard to Wound instead, which I think is almost as good if she's not within 3 inches, because it doesn't lock out Severes, but Cruel Disappointment doesn't actually make it more likely they flip weak. It just turns things into moderates, and Hard to Wound actually makes it more likely they flip weak. So it doesn't make it impossible for them to get a Severe, but it makes it harder, and it also makes it more likely that an ordinary attack will be weak. She also got Unimpeded, which is just great, for a model that wants to get in there and kill things. And her last Matriarch ability that let her take her 4th attack is now Other Friendly Bygone only. So they gave her an extra bonus when she's not in range to use it. Shield Generator, it's just a tiny little bit of extra shielded, so a little bit of extra survivability. And then there's a couple of other little changes. The pass-through trigger is now once per activation, which is probably good because if they hadn't done that, everyone would just do her attack run in tradition mode instead of technology mode. So instead of getting 4 attacks at 3, 4, 5, you get 3 attacks at 4, 5, 6, which is like almost the same, especially since those attacks do AoE damage. And Grave's Edge has a longer range, which I think they clearly want people to use this ability, but it's just not better than charging even with her, even though you don't get the plus twist, I think. It may be late in the turn when the enemy's hand is really stripped, but I don't know. I don't love Grave's Edge. I'd rather just make attacks. The big difference with the Iron Matron that makes her more challenging to use now is that you can't, if you're like, throwing her up there with toss, with off the path, whatever, you have to actually end within 2 inches of an enemy if you want to hit them. You can't sort of use Last Matriarch to nudge 3 inches in. So you could still do that. Like, you could still activate her late and send her out there. But it's something to keep in mind that, if you don't do, like, you already aren't getting 4 attacks. And if you have to move, you are either walking and therefore only getting 2 attacks, or you're charging and you no longer get the plus to damage flips from Greatsword. So just things to consider with her. Her attack run's a lot more dangerous. I'm going to have to test her. That might not be the best way to play her anymore. She's still just a really insanely strong beater when she's fast, but 10 stones is a lot. I kind of find myself wishing they had replaced Fresh from the Forge, which is kind of like a nothing trigger, with something like a little bit more dangerous, like even just like Blood Loss, or Mutilate or something. Just something that would make her a little bit more dangerous. A trigger you're excited to declare. Other changes. Koji, this is the most obvious change in the world. Taker's Bane is enemy only, so you can't just shoot friendly models for a bunch of free scheme markers that you draw cards from. And Wandering River style no longer drops markers, it places them, so it doesn't trigger protection money anymore. So if you miss drawing 30 cards a turn with Koji, I don't feel bad for you. Yannic Oh, Yannic. This is the saddest change to me. So Yannic was like way too good in Outcasts, especially in Frycore with the Frycore engineers, but really just generally, like, she was really good. The ability to turn discards into draws was so strong on crews that could generate the scheme markers. So like Von Schill would draw like 10 cards a turn with it, or maybe not that much, but a lot. So now it no longer draws you a card. It just, you remove the scheme marker, but you don't draw a card. And that's a bummer for Syndicate, because I really like Syndicate. It's one of my favorite keywords, but Syndicate is very weak. Its models are very fragile. Syndicate really needed that like crazy card draw to function. And with Syndicate, that much card draw was like just balanced. Like you have amazing card quality of a really stacked hand to counteract the fact that your models have kind of bad stats and die. So it's a bummer because I really want Anya to be good, but Syndicate is just so meh right now. And Yannic was really helping for a while. Yannic did get a little bit of a buff to democratic elections. The unexpected results trigger was like super complicated and kind of like didn't really do much, so she just gets Surge instead. She'll still probably draw one card per activation. And then Consolidate Power got a draw out Secrets trigger, which I like. It's cool. It's especially good when you're playing her with Anya. It's a way to summon drudges, but you know, poor Yannic. I'm gonna miss the old Yannic. There are a few other changes. Another one that's sort of in the category of technically a buff, but kind of a weird side grade is the Sergeant. Sergeants got a cost reduction to 6. Their backup ability got the same change that Maurice got. Their attacks got the Arrest Order trigger, which gains Adversary. And they did lose a New Horizon, which is an ability you would not use often, but you would occasionally use, and it was important when you used it. But really importantly is their attacks changed stats. They used to have a stat 5 sword and a stat 6 gun, which meant with Pursue, they had a stat 7 gun. And they no longer can get that. So if you want to make those stat 7 attacks, you have to get into melee, which is really not a place a, 5/5 minion with no defensive tech and 7 wounds wants to be. So I still think they're good. I mean, especially at 6 stones, they're good. And the ability to get kind of a free shot once, well, at minimum like once per turn, maybe twice per turn, is pretty cool, even if it's a stat 6 gun. But definitely people who play these guys a lot are going to miss the stat 7 gun. And then finally, we've got Corrupted Hounds. Corrupted Hounds are... they're still kind of mopey. Look, there are people who are going to try them now. They're having 4 health is actually a big deal. It makes it much harder to one-shot them. It used to be that they just get to one-shot anybody who has a min 3 or a min 2 with crit strike. You just like, it's def 4, willpower 3. You just kill the dog. So it kind of didn't matter how cheap they were. They are nimble, so they walk as a bonus action. And they are movement 6 and significant. So yeah, they're really cheap, but like they are really good schemers now. Also, they have this interesting ability to summon more of themselves with their other bonus action, Fetch. It's only once per turn, and you can't chain it because the summon dog comes in with Stunned. And the thing to note is that this is attached to an ability that has... It's Fetch is basically you remove a corpse marker, and then at the end of your activation, you drop the corpse marker. Like, he picks it up in his mouth, then he drops it. The way the ability works, you must remove a corpse marker when you declare the ability. It's a cost to activate the ability. You don't get the corpse marker back unless you pass. So if you try to use this ability and fail, you lose a corpse marker and you don't get it back. So that's a big deal. It means you should not be just doing this like fishing for it, especially in Neverborn crews that care, or Nephilim crews that care about the corpse markers. But, it is fun when you have the 6, and I've seen already people like just blind flipping the moderate 6 off the top, or the moderate crow off the top to get the summon, which is fun. I also think there's maybe some play here to like clustering dogs around an enemy and then attacking your own dogs to put black blood on enemies, but I don't know. We'll have to see that in action. And then so that's all the changes. There's an FAQ. Most of these things are pretty straightforward. A few things I think people were not already understanding or playing correctly. For the Seamus's Alone in the Dark on his title version versus Eye of the Hurricane. Eye of the Hurricane wins. Screw you, Seamus, whatever your name is, screw you.
Will of Cadmus just clarifies you always get last activation with it, which is a little buff to Nexus. Grave Goo. The Grave Goo's ability to make terrain poisonous works on terrain that enemies generate that only affects like their enemies, like a vent steam. So if you have, you run your Meta Golem up and the vent steam and the Grave Goo goes like, haha, I'm in there, Trail of Slime. Now the Mei Feng crew treats that vent steam aura as Grave Goo hazardous, which is, I think, funny. And then My Loyal Servant, it can heal the target of the action that it's on. Very good. Makes Big Brain even better. And then finally, there's a bunch of clarifications. The other one that's really significant to me is what does it mean for two objects to come into base contact with each other? I've posted about this before on my Goodhammer column about how the comes into base contact wording on the Clampet's Fisher Folks use them as bait ability is kind of unique. So we didn't really have a lot of guidance to how that ability was meant to work. And one natural interpretation of it is that because one of the most common ways the crew generates tide markers is by dropping them with inclement weather, that would work. So Wyrd has called out that it doesn't. It doesn't work quite the way some people were playing it either. The way it works is if at any object is moving, model, marker, anything is moving, and at any point during that move, the marker and the model are in base contact with each other, it triggers. So if you move the model into the marker, it triggers. If the model moves into the marker, it triggers. If the model and the marker are touching and either of them moves, even if they move out of base contact with each other, like even if they place away from each other, it still counts. It still triggers because during the course of a move, they were in base contact with each other. So that's not exactly how I expected it to work. I think that's a reasonable way for it to work. I think that's for Fisher Folk, it's a bit of a nerf if you were playing it such that inclement weather triggered use them as bait, because if you were playing it that way, you would trigger use them as bait 5+ times per turn pretty reliably. You got your 3 inclement weather, you got Bog, Mel, and Vantes, and then you'd get the dropped marker from the Fisher Folks trigger on their bonus action, and you'd maybe even get Bruce. And then that's, not even counting if enemy models were forced to move into it because they needed to do that to charge you, or you whirlpooled them into it, or you used reel in. So, you had a lot of ways to pull someone into a tide marker. I think now you will trigger it maybe 2 to 4 times per activation. Although later in the game, once you get engaged and you start dropping markers on them with inclement weather, you're kind of putting them in a position where they have to just sit there. And sitting there in melee with Uncle Bog kind of sucks to do. And if they don't sit there, if they try to move out, it triggers use them as bait. So I think it's still a fine ability, just not as strong as initially, suspected. So that's the errata. A lot of changes. I think that I'm really excited to play these crews. The big thing that changed to me is just that every crew that was unreasonably too good got fixed. Or almost every crew that was unreasonably too good. I think there are a couple of unreasonable crews left. But most crews that were unreasonably too good got fixed, which means there are still going to be crews that are the best in the game, right? That's just the nature of the beast. That's how miniature wargaming balance works. But the crews that are the best are not going to be so much better than everyone else now that when you're playing a crew that's not the best into one of them, you won't just feel terrible. You won't just feel like you can't possibly win. You will feel like there's something you could have done. So I think that's good. That makes me really excited. At the time I've recorded this, they have just announced Ashes of Malifaux, which very excited for. I am noting that this is the first time since 2020 that there has been no Malifaux content out in the wild that has not been subject to an errata cycle. Because originally we had Explorer Society, and then by the time they errated Explorer Society, we had Malifaux Burns, and then by the time they errated Malifaux Burns, we had Madness of Malifaux. So now Madness of Malifaux has been errated. Ashes of Malifaux is not out there yet. We don't know very much about what's going to be in there, but I am pretty excited about how it's going to work. I think that the new models are hopefully going to be a little bit more balanced than we got with Madness. They're very cool looking, certainly. I'm a big fan of that huge, muscular gremlin guy. I'm wondering if that's an alt Alphonse or if it's just a new gremlin guy. I'm here for buff gremlin guy. So in general, I'm looking forward to it a lot. You'll be hearing some videos from us when we start getting previews of Ashes of Malifaux. But until then, good luck on the tabletop, and thanks for stopping by the Danger Planet.